When the Pinecrest HOA president welded my ranch gate shut at 3 in the morning, I didn't just lose access to my property, I lost faith in humanity. What they didn't know, I'm a civil engineer who specializes in easements and property law, and I'd just inherited enough money to buy the abandoned logging road they'd been illegally using for their fancy landscaping trucks for years. Drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from, because you'll want to stick around for when I installed the automated toll booth and started charging them $750 per vehicle. By the end of this story, their precious community guidelines became their worst nightmare. I never wanted to be the guy at war with an HOA. My grandfather raised me better than that, always saying that good neighbors are worth more than gold. But when I found my ranch gate welded shut with a metal plate bolted across it and a laminated "Notice of Violation" flapping in the morning breeze, I knew peaceful coexistence wasn't in the cards. But let me back up. My name is Baron Drake, and until 6 months ago, I was living in Seattle, working as a civil engineer specializing in municipal infrastructure and property law. When my grandfather passed away, he left me his 35-acre ranch that bordered Pinecrest Estates, an upscale housing development that had sprung up about 15 years ago. Grandpa's land had been in our family for generations, and when the developers came calling in the early 2000s, he negotiated limited access through a small section of his property for their original construction. He was a reasonable man, the kind who believed in working together. The morning I had discovered the welded gate, I was supposed to be meeting with contractors about renovating the old ranch house. Instead, I found myself staring at what could only be described as an act of trespassing, vandalism, and frankly a bizarre power move. The notice, printed on premium cardstock with an embossed Pinecrest Estates logo, informed me that my property had been incorporated into the Pinecrest HOA jurisdiction following county rezoning, and that my non-conforming gate and fence line were now subject to community standards. I laughed out loud. There had been no rezoning. My grandfather's property wasn't part of their development. Someone was bluffing, badly, and they had picked the wrong guy to try it on. Standing there in the chilly morning air, I called the number on the notice. A woman with a voice like artificial sweetener answered. "Pinecrest Estates Management Office, how may I direct your call?" "This is Baron Drake, owner of the property adjacent to your development. Someone has vandalized my gate and left a fraudulent notice. I'd like to speak to whoever's responsible." After being placed on hold for what felt like an eternity, a different voice came on the line, honey smooth but with barbs underneath. "This is Keisha Vance, president of the Pinecrest HOA. I understand you're confused about the recent changes, Mr. Drake." "There are no recent changes, Ms. Vance. My property is not part of your HOA, never has been, and your people have committed criminal trespass and vandalism. I need this gate functional within the hour, or I'm calling the sheriff." Her laugh had the warmth of January in Alaska. "Mr. Drake, perhaps you haven't been properly informed. The county commissioners approved a rezoning petition last month that incorporated outlying properties into our development zone. Your rustic fence line violates at least 6 of our community standards. We've simply taken the initiative to begin enforcement." I felt my blood pressure rising, but kept my voice level. "I'll need to see documentation of this supposed rezoning. In the meantime, I have contractors arriving who need access to my property. I'll have our management office email you the relevant documents. As for your contractors, they'll need to apply for work permits through our architectural review committee. The application fee is $500 and the review process takes approximately 3 weeks. I ended the call before saying something I'd regret. Using bolt cutters from my truck, I cut through their welding job, which took nearly an hour and left me sweating despite the cool morning. While working, I noticed a white SUV parked just inside the development entrance, watching me. When I finally got the gate open, the SUV drove away. Later that day, while showing the contractors around the property, I met my first ally. A woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled back in a practical bun approached across the field that separated the ranch from the nearest Pinecrest homes. "You must be Carl's grandson," she said, extending her hand. "I'm Lonnie Wells. I was friends with your grandfather for years. Been watching that HOA bunch giving you trouble this morning." I shook her hand, noticing the shrewd intelligence in her eyes. "Baron Drake, pleasure to meet you, though I wish it were under better circumstances." Lonnie glanced at my mutilated gate. "I saw what they did. That's Keisha and her cronies all over. Act first, make up rules later. I was a paralegal for 40 years before retiring. Those people have been trying to get their hands on this property since your grandfather got sick." We spoke for nearly an hour, Lonnie explained that she'd been documenting the HOA's increasingly aggressive tactics, attending every meeting and recording everything legally possible. According to her, Keisha Vance had transformed from an ordinary board member to a power-hungry president over the past 2 years, surrounding herself with like-minded board members who rubber-stamped her decisions. The latest rumor is they want to build a second entrance to reduce traffic congestion, and your property is the only logical route, Lonnie explained. But there's more to it. This hillside is the highest point overlooking the valley, and it has natural springs. Keisha's been in talks with developers about expanding Pinecrest. Your grandfather never would sell, no matter what they offered. That evening, I checked my security cameras, something else Grandpa had installed in his final years. The footage from 3 a.m. showed 3 figures approaching my gate with welding equipment. Even in the night vision footage, I could make out Keisha's distinctive silhouette directing the operation. The next morning, I found another notice on my repaired gate, this one announcing a $2,500 fine for destruction of community property. I tore it down and called my cousin Jonathan, who worked as a land assessor for the county. Rezoning petition? There's nothing like that on record, he confirmed after checking. They're bluffing, Baron. But be careful. Keisha Vance has friends in the commissioner's office. They might try to push something through retroactively if you make too much noise. That afternoon, while walking the property line, I discovered something interesting. An old logging road cutting across the back corner of my land. And judging by the fresh tire tracks, Pinecrest's landscaping crews had been using it regularly to access the back of their development, completely without permission. My grandfather had mentioned something about this in his final months, but I hadn't paid much attention at the time. Back at the house, I dug through Grandpa's office until I found what I was looking for. The original property surveys, deeds, and a folder labeled Pinecrest Encroachment, containing dated photographs of vehicles using the logging road, along with notes about his conversations with previous HOA boards. Apparently, he'd allowed temporary access during some utility work years ago, but had repeatedly denied permanent easement requests. Inside was also another folder, this one labeled simply Nuclear Option. It contained documentation proving that the original Pinecrest development agreement specifically excluded my grandfather's property from any future incorporation into the HOA, signed by the county commissioners and notarized. It also included information about the logging road. It wasn't actually on my property, but on a separate 5-acre parcel owned by Western Timber Holdings, who had abandoned operations in the area years ago. As I sat there surrounded by my grandfather's meticulous records, my phone pinged with an email from Pinecrest Management. Attached was a clearly fraudulent rezoning notice, with signatures that didn't match any current commissioners, according to Jonathan. What they didn't know was that the funeral wasn't the only surprise that week. I'd also inherited $1.2 million from my grandfather, and I was about to use it to teach them a lesson about property rights they'd never forget. The next morning, I learned from Lonnie that a massive landscaping delivery was scheduled to arrive the following day. Materials worth $75,000 for their community beautification project, all to be delivered via the logging road they had no legal right to use. I smiled for the first time since finding my gate welded shut. Grandpa had left me more than just land. He'd left me the perfect opportunity for revenge. The morning after discovering the HOA's landscaping delivery plans, I called Gabrielle Washington, an attorney specializing in property disputes that my Seattle firm often partnered with. After explaining the situation, she agreed to take my case. They've made several critical errors, Gabrielle explained during our video call. Falsifying rezoning documents is fraud, damaging your gate is criminal vandalism and potentially felony trespassing. The unauthorized use of the logging road is a separate trespassing issue, though technically against Western Timber rather than you directly. I'll draft a cease and desist immediately. While Gabrielle prepared the legal documents, I continued my investigation. Lonnie introduced me to several other Pinecrest residents who had run afoul of Keisha's regime. A retired doctor had been fined thousands for planting non-approved native species in his garden. A young family had their permission to build a fence revoked mid-construction, leaving them with unusable materials and a $1,000 restoration fee. The pattern was clear. Keisha wielded the HOA's power arbitrarily and punitively against anyone who challenged her vision. It's not just about control. explained Russell Dawson, a retired judge who had recently moved to Pinecrest. There's money involved. Keisha's sister owns the landscaping company that has an exclusive contract with the HOA. The architectural review committee that collects all those application fees, her college roommate chairs it. They've raised our dues 30% in 2 years, with minimal improvements to show for it. Filed my formal complaint with the county about the gate incident, only to have it mysteriously delayed. Jonathan confirmed my suspicions. Commissioner Harley Green, Keisha's regular golf partner, had flagged the complaint for additional review. Lonnie provided me with recordings from recent HOA meetings where they discussed my property without using my name, referring instead to the adjacent acquisition target and Phase 3 expansion zone. In one recording, Brenda Kemp, another board member and Keisha's right hand, explicitly mentioned leveraging county connections to facilitate the transfer. Meanwhile, Keisha escalated her harassment campaign. Each morning brought new violation notices, each more absurd than the last. My non-conforming agricultural equipment, my grandfather's restored tractor, was visible from community spaces. My decision to cut my own gate open constituted destruction of community enhancement measures. The daily fines now totaled over $4,000. I continued researching the logging road situation, discovering that Western Timber Holdings was in the process of liquidating their regional assets. A call to their corporate office confirmed what I suspected. The 5-acre parcel containing the logging road was available for $800,000. While the price was steep, it represented a perfect strategic acquisition. If I controlled that road, I controlled Pinecrest's back access, the same access they had been using without permission for years, and the same access they needed for tomorrow's big landscaping delivery. I called my financial advisor to arrange the transfer, then had Gabrielle prepare the purchase agreement. By that evening, I had a signed contract giving me first right of refusal on the property, with closing scheduled in 2 weeks. I would need to move quickly if I wanted to be ready for tomorrow's delivery. That night, I received a formal cease and desist letter from Pinecrest's attorney, a laughably amateur document threatening legal action if I didn't immediately pay all accumulated fines and submit to HOA authority. The letter inadvertently confirmed what I already knew. They had no legal basis for their claims. If they had, they would have simply filed for an injunction. When Lonnie called the next morning, her voice was tight with urgency. "Baron, I just got out of their emergency board meeting. They're planning to begin construction of a second clubhouse, and the plans show it partially on your land. They're acting like they already own it." "How are they justifying that?" I asked, stunned by their audacity. "Yeah, they're not even trying to justify it anymore," Keisha said, and I quote, "That country bumpkin doesn't understand what he's up against. By the time he figures it out, it'll be too late. They don't know about your background or connections. They think you're just an easy target." As I hung up, I opened my grandfather's nuclear option folder again. Inside was a handwritten note I'd missed before. "Sometimes good fences make necessary neighbors, and sometimes you need to show them why the fence was there in the first place. Don't let them take what our family built." I smiled grimly. As I learned their landscaping company was scheduled to deliver materials worth $75,000 the next morning, using my road, I realized Grandpa had left me more than just land. He'd left me the perfect opportunity for revenge. With my purchase agreement for the logging road in hand, I worked through the night to prepare. Western Timber's representative had agreed to expedite the process, given the all-cash offer, and by morning, I had preliminary ownership documents, enough to establish my right to control access, even before the final close. At dawn, I drove to the hardware store in town and purchased everything I needed. No trespassing signs, property boundary markers, security cameras, and materials to construct a simple but effective gate at the logging road's entrance. I also picked up several large concrete blocks that could be moved into place quickly if needed. By 9, I had property markers installed along the logging road boundary and private property no unauthorized access signs posted every 50 feet. I set up 4 solar-powered security cameras with motion detection and cellular uplink, ensuring I'd have video evidence of any trespassing. The most important preparation, however, was the simple barrier gate I installed at the road's entrance, complete with a large sign reading, "Public Road Access Only," and a QR code linking to a payment portal I'd hastily created overnight. As I finished setting up, Russell arrived to witness the operation. "You sure about this, Baron? Keisha doesn't respond well to challenges." "I'm done playing defense. I replied, checking the stability of the gatepost. Time to establish some consequences for their actions. We didn't have to wait long. At precisely 10:30, a convoy of landscaping trucks approached the logging road. 5 large flatbeds, loaded with trees, shrubs, and pallets of stone, followed by excavation equipment on trailers. Leading the procession was a black SUV with the Pinecrest logo emblazoned on the door. The convoy stopped abruptly at my new gate. The SUV's window rolled down, revealing Keisha's outraged face. "What the hell is this?" she demanded, not bothering with pleasantries. I approached calmly, property documents and purchase agreement in hand. "This is private property, Miss Vance. I've acquired the rights to this road from Western Timber Holdings. Any access now requires permission and payment of the posted toll." She laughed incredulously. "You can't be serious. We have a landscaping delivery scheduled. This road has been our access point for years." "Without permission," I countered. "That was trespassing then, and it would be trespassing now, unless you'd like to pay the access fee, $750 per vehicle, payable before entry." The driver of the first truck rolled down his window. "Ma'am, we're on a schedule here. What do you want us to do?" Keisha's face contorted with fury. "Remove this ridiculous gate immediately. This is an essential access road for our community." "It's a private road on private property," I explained patiently, allowing a slight smile. "But I'm willing to accommodate your delivery for the appropriate fee. 5 vehicles, plus the equipment trailers, that comes to $4,500 for today's access." "This is extortion," she sputtered. "No, Miss Vance, this is property law. Something you seemed very concerned about when welding my gate shut. I have documentation proving my legal ownership. Do you have any documentation showing your right to access this road?" Her silence was answer enough. Behind her, the truck drivers were growing impatient, engines idling. "I'm calling the sheriff," she finally said, reaching for her phone. "Excellent idea. I was about to suggest the same thing." 15 minutes later, Deputy Collins arrived, clearly unhappy about being caught in a neighborhood dispute. After reviewing my documentation and listening to both sides, he turned to Keisha. "Ma'am, it appears Mr. Drake has legal ownership rights to this road. If you've been using it without permission or compensation, that's technically trespassing." "This is absurd," Keisha protested. "We have $75,000 of landscaping materials that need to be delivered today. That I suggest you work out an arrangement with Mr. Drake, find another delivery route, or reschedule," the deputy replied flatly, clearly not interested in being in the middle of this dispute any longer than necessary. After the deputy left, Keisha approached me again, her voice lower, almost threatening. "You have no idea who you're dealing with. This community has resources and connections you can't imagine." "And yet here we are," I replied calmly. $4,500 for today's access, or your trucks can turn around and find another route if one exists." We both knew there wasn't another viable route for vehicles that size without going 20 miles around. The original development plans had relied on this back axis for construction, which was why my grandfather had granted temporary permission years ago. After a heated phone call with someone she referred to as the committee, Keisha finally thrust her credit card at me. "This isn't over," she warned, as I processed the payment through my hastily created portal. "I certainly hope not," I replied, raising the gate to allow the trucks through. "In fact, I think we're just getting started." The look on Keisha's face when the sheriff sided with me was priceless, but it was nothing compared to when I handed her the invoice for $14,500 for their 6 trucks that had already crossed my property that morning. As the last truck rumbled through, I couldn't help but think this was exactly what Grandpa had anticipated with his nuclear option folder. He hadn't just left me land, he'd left me leverage. That evening, Lonnie called to report that an emergency HOA board meeting had been called. "They're livid," she chuckled. Keisha and Brenda were practically apoplectic, ranting about dealing with this Drake problem once and for all. "They have no idea you're just getting started, do they?" "No," I replied, finalizing designs for the automated toll booth system I planned to install. "But they're about to find out exactly what happens when you pick a fight with a civil engineer who specializes in easements and property rights." The emergency HOA meeting Lonnie described proved to be just the beginning of Keisha's counteroffensive. Within 48 hours, every resident of Pinecrest Estates received an urgent community bulletin describing me as a hostile adjacent landowner attempting to extort our community and urging residents to report any suspicious activity around my property. The bulletin conveniently omitted any mention of the welded gate incident or their unauthorized use of the logging road for years. I wasn't particularly bothered by the character assassination until I discovered that several of my contractor appointments had been canceled after receiving concerns about community safety from Pinecrest's management office. It was time to upgrade my response. Over the next week, I transformed the simple gate at the logging road into a sophisticated automated toll booth system. I installed a heavy-duty barrier gate connected to a payment processing terminal, multiple high-definition cameras, and an intercom system. The entire setup was powered by solar panels, with battery backup, and connected to my home network via a dedicated wireless link. Most importantly, it would generate time-stamped records and receipts for every transaction or attempted unauthorized access. I also installed motion-activated floodlights and additional cameras along the property boundary with Pinecrest. If they were going to monitor me, I would return the favor tenfold. My cousin Jonathan came through with county records showing that Pinecrest had been billing residents for community access road maintenance for years, effectively charging their members for improvements to a road they had no legal right to use. This could potentially expose the HOA to liability for fraud if residents chose to pursue it. The toll booth went operational on a Wednesday morning. By Wednesday evening, I had my first incident. A Pinecrest maintenance truck attempting to bypass the gate by driving through the shallow ditch beside it. The cameras captured everything, including the Pinecrest logo on the vehicle door and the driver's frustrated expression when he realized he'd been recorded. I promptly sent an invoice for $750 to the HOA office, along with video evidence and a reminder that the next unauthorized access attempt would result in trespassing charges. Thursday brought the second test of my system, this time in the form of Keisha herself, accompanied by a man she introduced via the intercom as our legal counsel. They demanded access without payment for an inspection of community resources. "I'm happy to accommodate an inspection," I replied through the system. "The access fee remains $750. "This is harassment," Keisha snapped. "We have easement rights through prior use." Prescriptive easements require open, notorious, continuous use with the owner's knowledge for the statutory period, I explained. "My grandfather documented his objections to your use of this road regularly, as his records show. You have no easement rights. However, you're welcome to file for a judicial determination if you disagree." The lawyer whispered something to Keisha, who glared at the camera before retreating to her vehicle. That night, the real escalation began. Shortly after midnight, my phone alerted me to movement at the toll booth. The night vision cameras showed 3 figures approaching the gate with what appeared to be bolt cutters. I immediately called the sheriff's department and activated the system's audible warning. "Attention! You are attempting to access private property without authorization. You are being recorded and law enforcement has been notified. Please vacate the premises immediately." The would-be vandals scattered, but not before the cameras captured clear images of their faces, including Brenda Kemp and Keisha's brother-in-law, who ran the landscaping company. The next morning, I filed a police report, complete with video evidence. Deputy Collins seemed less than enthusiastic about pursuing the case, but acknowledged he had no choice given the clarity of the evidence. "Just so you know," he said as he was leaving, "Commissioner Green has been asking questions about you and this property dispute." "I'm not surprised," I replied. "You might want to ask the commissioner about his financial interests in Pinecrest Estates. I understand several recent developments have required unusual exemptions from the County Planning Commission." The deputy's expression told me all I needed to know about the local political landscape. Later that day, Lanny brought news that the landscaping company had refused to continue working on the Pinecrest project, citing access issues and contractual concerns. Rather than find a solution, Keisha had hired her sister's new landscaping company at nearly double the previous rates, with the increased costs passed directly to residents in the form of a special assessment. "People are starting to ask questions," Lonnie explained over coffee on my porch. "The initial story about a troublemaking neighbor isn't holding up, especially with these new charges hitting their bank accounts. Russell has been quietly sharing copies of the original development agreements that excluded your property from their jurisdiction. Meanwhile, I continued sending invoices to the HOA for each unauthorized approach to the gate, documented with time-stamped video evidence. By the end of the week, they owed me over $10,000 in access fees and penalties, fees they refused to pay but couldn't dispute given the evidence. The community newsletter's next edition featured a front-page story about rising security concerns and included thinly veiled suggestions that I was unstable and potentially dangerous. They also announced a mandatory community meeting to discuss protective measures against external threats. I attended this meeting accompanied by Russell and Gabrielle. The stunned silence when we walked into the clubhouse was almost comical. Keisha recovered quickly, though, shifting the agenda to landscaping updates and avoiding any mention of the access road dispute. After the meeting, several residents approached us in the parking lot, curious about the other side of the story they'd been hearing. By the time we left, a small group had formed, what they jokingly called the Truth Committee, determined to get answers about where their increasing dues and assessments were actually going. 2 days later, Keisha played what she thought was her trump card. Using her connection to Commissioner Green, she secured a temporary emergency access permit for the logging road, citing critical infrastructure maintenance needs. The permit, delivered to me by a smug-looking courier, purported to override my property rights for 30 days, based on community welfare concerns. I immediately had Gabrielle challenge the permit, which had been issued without the required public notice or comment period. More importantly, I discovered that the critical maintenance justification was based on fabricated water quality reports, suggesting that Pinecrest's water supply was at risk without immediate repair work. Repairs that would conveniently require access across my newly acquired road and potentially my inherited property. Russell, using his judicial contacts, obtained copies of HOA financial records showing that over $300,000 in infrastructure reserves had been reallocated to special projects over the past year, with minimal documentation. These records also revealed that Keisha had personally approved payments of over $50,000 to a consultation company owned by her son, a company that appeared to have no other clients or business activities. The pieces were falling into place. This wasn't just about a power-hungry HOA president. This was systematic financial mismanagement bordering on embezzlement, with my grandfather's property as both cover and opportunity for expansion. When I saw them celebrating their victory with champagne at the clubhouse after securing the emergency permit, I knew it was time to deploy what I now called Grandpa's Revenge Protocol, starting with the 30-foot electronic billboard I installed facing their pool area, displaying their own financial misdeeds on a continuous loop. The electronic billboard became my opening move in this chess game. Standing 30 feet tall on my property but perfectly visible from Pinecrest's community pool and clubhouse, it cycled through their financial discrepancies, unauthorized road usage, and the falsified water quality reports. Each slide ended with a simple question: where is your money really going, Pinecrest? Within hours, Keisha stormed to my front door with 2 board members and Deputy Collins in tow. "That sign violates county ordinances," she insisted, her voice tight with barely controlled rage. I smiled pleasantly. "Actually, it's an agricultural information display, exempt under County Code 327.5. I checked with the planning office this morning." The deputy confirmed I was right about the exemption, much to Keisha's frustration. After they left with vague legal threats, I implemented Phase 2, perfectly legal but maximally annoying countermeasures along our shared boundary. Motion-activated sprinklers that accidentally sprayed anyone approaching from the Pinecrest side. Bright security lights that illuminated their properties whenever movement was detected. A weather station with an extraordinarily loud wind measurement device facing their quietest cul-de-sac. I created a detailed website documenting the ongoing dispute with timelines, legal documents, and video evidence. The site quickly gained popularity among Pinecrest residents concerned about rising costs and questionable management decisions. My toll booth system continued documenting every approach, with unpaid HOA invoices now totaling over $45,000, a fact prominently displayed on my billboard. Lonnie's Truth Committee grew to include nearly 30 residents with their own stories of HOA overreach. Russell arranged a meeting with the County Ethics Committee regarding Commissioner Green's involvement in the emergency access permit, after which the commissioner suddenly became unavailable to Keisha. One evening, while marking boundary lines, Keisha approached alone, a first. "This has gone far enough," she said. "You're turning our community against itself and damaging property values." "I'm exercising my legal rights," I replied calmly, "something you seemed concerned about when it suited your purposes." "What do you want? Money?" She gestured toward the hillside. This land isn't special. It's just dirt and trees. I faced her directly. If it's just dirt and trees, why are you so determined to control it? Why falsify documents and damage my property? This land is my grandfather's legacy. To you, it's a development opportunity. To me, it's family history. Her expression hardened. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I built this community from nothing. Every premium amenity, every property value increase, that was my vision. I won't let some nostalgic engineer undo everything I've worked for. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. I have investments that depend on expanding this development. People who don't bend tend to break, Mr. Drake. Consider this a friendly warning. As she walked away, I questioned whether my escalating countermeasures were justice or petty revenge. I wrote in my journal, I'm not sure where the line is between reclaiming justice and pursuing revenge. Am I becoming another version of Keisha? Russell had advised that as long as I stayed within legal boundaries, this wasn't merely revenge. It was protecting legitimate rights. But in the quiet night, I wondered if I could both reclaim justice and maintain my integrity. My introspection was interrupted by a security alert. The cameras showed 3 figures tampering with my weather station. They left behind a broken sensor and a crude note, "Back off or worse coming." Any doubts I had vanished. This wasn't about land anymore. It was about refusing to be bullied. The next day, I received notice of an emergency HOA meeting with only one agenda item: final resolution of the Drake situation. I spent that night preparing with Russell and Lonnie, organizing all our evidence of financial misconduct, permit fraud, and harassment. As I walked into that packed meeting room with Russell beside me and my documented evidence in hand, Keisha's face turned ghost white. Half the room was wearing custom t-shirts with my toll booth logo and the words, "The Drake Solution," printed across the back. The residents had made their choice, and it wasn't Keisha Vance. The Pinecrest Clubhouse had never been so crowded. Residents filled every chair, lined the walls, and spilled onto the patio. Keisha sat at the front with Brenda and loyal board members, attempting to project authority despite her visibly shaken composure. When she saw Russell and me enter, followed by residents wearing the Drake Solution t-shirts, her facade cracked momentarily before she recovered, rapping her gavel with excessive force. "This emergency session will come to order," she announced. "Due to the sensitive nature of tonight's discussion, we'll be modifying our usual format. There will be no open comment period." An older gentleman in the front row stood up. "Point of order, Madam President. The bylaws require an open comment period for any emergency session." He held up a dog-eared copy of the HOA regulations. After some resistance, Keisha conceded, "Very well, but first the board has prepared a presentation regarding the ongoing security and access issues." What followed was a masterpiece of misinformation. Using professional-looking slides, Keisha painted Pinecrest as under siege from outside forces, primarily me, threatening their property values and security. She referred to the welded gate incident as a necessary security measure. My property purchase became a hostile acquisition designed to extort our community. The most egregious claim was that I had been secretly attempting to sell my grandfather's property to commercial developers, planning high-density, low-income housing that would fundamentally alter the exclusive character of Pinecrest Estates. When she concluded, Russell stood up. As a new resident, I was initially impressed by this community. However, I've become increasingly concerned about the board's transparency, particularly regarding financial decisions. Brenda immediately interrupted. "This meeting is about security concerns, not financial matters." "Actually," Russell continued calmly, "they're inseparable. The emergency access issue involves significant expenditures that weren't approved through proper channels. The so-called security measures against Mr. Drake's property were undertaken without membership notification or vote, despite costing over $15,000. A murmur ran through the crowd as Russell methodically dismantled each of Keisha's claims, while I distributed copies of the financial discrepancies we'd uncovered. When Russell mentioned the falsified water quality reports, Keisha exploded. "That's a lie. We followed proper procedures. I personally oversaw the water testing after we found contamination near that ranch property." The room went silent. Russell raised an eyebrow. Interesting that you personally oversaw these tests, since the county has no record of any water quality concerns in this area for 5 years. The only documentation they have is what you submitted, documentation that 3 independent experts have identified as falsified. You have no right to investigate board actions. Keisha's face flushed dark red. Who do you think you are? As a retired federal judge, I spoke up, and I'm not a country bumpkin easily intimidated. I'm a civil engineer who specializes in property law. We know exactly what you've been doing. Lonnie stood next, addressing the crowd. I've lived in Pinecrest since the first homes were built. I've attended every board meeting for 5 years. What's happening isn't just about a boundary dispute with Baron Drake. It's about systematic efforts to use our dues for personal profit. She held up a thick folder. These are records of every questionable financial decision and conflict of interest during Keisha's tenure. I've been documenting them as part of a state investigation into HOA fraud. Questions erupted from residents. Is it true we've been paying for road maintenance on property we don't own? Why did my dues increase 30% when we're spending less on maintenance? Keisha tried regaining control, banging her gavel. This meeting is adjourned. We'll reconvene when emotions aren't running so high. Motion to continue the meeting, called a voice from the crowd. The seconder and affirmative votes came rapidly. Motion to call for a vote of no confidence in the current board. Another overwhelming show of hands. Keisha stood, her composure shattered. You can't do this. I built this community. Without me, you'd all be living in tract homes with chain-link fences. I've given everything to maintain our exclusivity and property values. In her fury, she made a fatal mistake, including dealing with that stubborn old man who refused to sell no matter what we offered. Do you know what that property is worth to developers? Millions. But he wouldn't budge. And then he left it to his grandson, who's even more difficult. What choice did we have but to take matters into our own hands? The room went completely silent. She had just admitted to the harassment campaign against my grandfather and the illegal actions against my property. For the record, I stepped forward. Could you clarify what you mean by taking matters into your own hands? Are you referring to welding my gate shut, falsifying documents, attempting to vandalize my property? Realizing what she'd done, Keisha grabbed her papers and headed for the door. This meeting is over. You'll be hearing from our attorneys. The residents voted to remove the current board, appointing Russell as interim president until proper elections. They also authorized an independent audit of finances and formally apologized to me for the association's actions. As the meeting concluded, Keisha stormed out, nearly colliding with me in the parking lot. This isn't over, she hissed. You have no idea what you've done. I think I do, I replied. I've helped these people reclaim their community from someone who abused their trust. Her eyes narrowed. Enjoy your victory while it lasts. Some things, once broken, can't be fixed. I thought little of her threat until the next morning, when I discovered my original gate completely destroyed, metal posts torn from the ground and fencing cut to pieces. A crude message had been spray-painted on my driveway. Happy now? My security cameras had captured everything. At 2:30 in the morning, 4 figures had approached with power tools and a pickup truck. The night vision footage clearly showed Keisha directing the operation, while her brother-in-law and 2 others methodically destroyed the gate. The most damning evidence was the audio, recording Keisha's voice clearly saying, "Let's see how he likes having no gate at all." What they didn't know was that I'd already prepared for this exact scenario, and their worst nightmare was about to begin. The morning after finding my gate destroyed, I sat in the sheriff's department with Deputy Collins, watching his expression change from skeptical to stunned as he viewed the security footage. That's unambiguous, he admitted, rewinding to watch Keisha's face clearly visible as she directed the vandalism. We can't ignore this level of evidence. I'm pressing charges, I stated firmly. Felony vandalism, criminal trespass, and destruction of property. I want arrests made today. The deputy shifted uncomfortably. Mr. Drake, you understand this involves prominent community members. There are protocols. Are you suggesting different laws apply to prominent community members? I asked, my voice level but firm. Because I'm prepared to send this footage to every news outlet in the state if that's the case. I'm also prepared to file formal complaints with the state attorney general regarding selective enforcement. He raised his hands in surrender. That won't be necessary. I'll need to consult with the sheriff, but we'll proceed according to the evidence. I wasn't taking chances. As soon as I left the sheriff's office, I sent copies of the footage to Gabrielle, Russell, and, most importantly, to a contact at the regional news desk, who had expressed interest in the story after noticing my electronic billboard. What happened next exceeded even my expectations. By noon, 2 local news vans were parked outside the sheriff's department. By 2, the state police had arrived, taking over the investigation after concerns about potential conflicts of interest with local law enforcement. By 4, Keisha, Brenda, and their 2 accomplices were being led from their homes in handcuffs, their arrests captured live by news cameras. The arrests were just the beginning. The search warrants executed on their homes and offices revealed a trove of incriminating evidence. Financial records showing systematic misappropriation of HOA funds, communications with developers regarding plans for my property that predated my grandfather's death, and, most damning of all, explicit discussions about falsifying county documents to force my compliance. What nobody expected was how quickly the investigation expanded. The falsified water quality reports submitted for the emergency access permit triggered an environmental compliance review. This led investigators to discover that Keisha had been cutting corners on required environmental protections for years, including improper disposal of landscaping chemicals in an area dangerously close to the community's actual water supply. Commissioner Green, seeing which way the wind was blowing, hastily recused himself from all matters related to Pinecrest, citing potential appearance of conflicts without admitting any wrongdoing. This didn't save him from being included in the widening investigation when records showed he had received consulting fees from Keisha's son's shell company. After Keisha's arrest, there was a surprising lull in developments. The wheels of justice turned slowly, even with compelling evidence, and I found myself in a strange position, having won the battle but unsure what victory really meant. The new interim HOA board, led by Russell, approached me about establishing clear property boundaries and access agreements. The vandalized gate was still a pile of twisted metal, and my grandfather's legacy still felt somewhat tarnished by the whole ordeal. I expected to feel satisfaction when the sheriff's department finally acted, but instead felt a hollow uncertainty. Was all this conflict what my grandfather would have wanted? He had always emphasized being a good neighbor, even when it was difficult. The answer came from an unexpected source. During the cleanup of my destroyed gate, nearly 20 Pinecrest residents showed up voluntarily to help. People who had been silent during Keisha's reign, but now felt free to act according to their own values. Your grandfather helped me install my irrigation system when I first moved here, one older gentleman told me as we worked. Never asked for anything in return, said that's just what neighbors do. Others shared similar stories, my grandfather helping during power outages, lending equipment, offering advice on everything from gardening to home repairs. The man they described was exactly the person I remembered, someone who believed in community, but also in standing firm on matters of principle. With the residents' help, we had the entrance cleared in a day. Rather than replacing the gate immediately, I left it open as a gesture of goodwill, while the new HOA board and I negotiated a formal agreement regarding boundaries and limited access rights. The investigation into Pinecrest finances revealed years of mismanagement. Keisha had been skimming from various accounts, inflating contracts with vendors owned by friends and family, and using HOA resources for personal projects. The total misappropriation exceeded $300,000, money that should have gone to community improvements and reserves. Meanwhile, I had to decide what to do with the accumulated toll fees from the logging road, now over $60,000. After consideration, I announced that I was donating the entire amount to establish a neighborhood integrity fund to assist homeowners who had been financially harmed by the previous board's actions. The goodwill generated by this decision helped heal much of the remaining division in the community. 3 weeks after the arrests, the county prosecutor called to inform me that Keisha, Brenda, and their accomplices had accepted a plea deal. They would serve no jail time but would pay substantial restitution, perform community service, and be permanently barred from serving on any HOA board or similar organization. More importantly, they would have to issue public apologies and acknowledge their wrongdoing. The day they delivered those apologies in the Pinecrest clubhouse was surreal. Keisha, normally so commanding and elegantly dressed, looked diminished in casual clothes, her voice flat as she read from a prepared statement. I abused the trust placed in me by this community. I allowed personal gain to override ethical considerations and proper governance. I specifically acknowledged the harassment and property damage directed at Carlton Drake and his grandson, Baron Drake, and accept full responsibility for those actions. When she finished, there was no applause, no visible reaction at all, just silent acknowledgement of a painful chapter closing. Afterward, as residents filtered out, Keisha approached me directly. "I hope you're satisfied," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "This was never about satisfaction," I replied honestly. "It was about right and wrong, about respecting boundaries and playing by the rules." "The rules aren't the same for everyone," she said, a flash of her old defiance returning. "They should be," I countered. "That's the entire point." As she turned to leave, I added, "For what it's worth, I'm sorry it came to this. My grandfather respected what you built here, even when he disagreed with your methods." She paused momentarily, but left without responding. I suspected it would be the last conversation we ever had. In the months that followed, healing began in earnest. The new HOA board, permanently restructured to include term limits and enhanced financial oversight, worked collaboratively with all community members. Russell proved to be an exceptional interim president, focusing on transparency and rebuilding trust. I eventually rebuilt my gate, a simple, functional design that remained open during daylight hours. I also granted a formal emergency access easement across my property with clear limitations and accountability measures. It seemed like the right balance between maintaining boundaries and being a good neighbor. Lonnie's meticulous documentation became the foundation for a state-level initiative to reform HOA governance, creating stronger protections against the type of abuse Pinecrest had experienced. Perhaps the most satisfying outcome came nearly a year later, when I used the remainder of my inheritance to purchase an additional 20 acres adjacent to my property, land that had been targeted for high-density development. Instead, I placed it under a conservation easement, ensuring it would remain natural green space in perpetuity, serving as a buffer between developments and a reminder of the area's natural beauty. On the anniversary of the gate incident, I hosted a community barbecue at the ranch. Nearly every Pinecrest resident attended, many bringing dishes and drinks to share. As the evening wound down, Russell raised a toast to good neighbors and necessary fences. Later, as the crowd thinned, I found myself standing by the rebuilt gate with Lonnie, watching the sunset paint the hills gold. "Your grandfather would be proud," she said quietly, "not just of how you stood up to them, but of how you helped heal things afterward." The day I watched Keisha and Brenda being escorted from their homes after the fraud convictions, I didn't feel the satisfaction I'd expected. Instead, I felt something better: pride in a community that had found its voice again. My grandfather always said, "Good fences make good neighbors, but good neighbors don't need fences." Today, the gate between my property and Pinecrest stands open during daylight hours, a reminder that sometimes you have to fight for your rights before you can extend your hand in friendship. The toll booth? I kept it installed right in my front yard as a flower planter, and a reminder that sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's moving forward together.
We're QA Stories, and this is just one of many unbelievable tales. Catch more by checking out the next video. We promise it's even wilder.